In the upscale neighborhood of Holmby Hills, Los Angeles, and Baxter's former home stands as a timeless mid-century jewel, secluded behind manicured hedges and wrought-iron gates. The house exudes an air of classic Hollywood, with its sprawling living spaces and large windows that catch the light at just the right angle. Yet, it is not the house's beauty that intrigues its visitors, it is the unsettling phenomenon reported within its walls. The current owners, Emily and Victor, moved into the property in 2018, drawn by its charm and storied history. Emily, a screenwriter herself, found it thrilling that and Baxter, a legendary actress who starred in All About Eve, had once called this place home. What she didn't anticipate, however, was how deeply the house would connect her to a mysterious and eerie side of Hollywood's golden era. It began one quiet evening in early autumn. Emily sat in her study, trying to work on her latest script, but she was distracted by the faint clicking sound coming from the direction of the living room. At first, she assumed it was Victor typing on his laptop. However, when she entered the room, she found it empty. The sound stopped the moment she stepped inside. She shrugged it off as her imagination, but over the weeks, the sound returned soft, rhythmic clacking, unmistakably the sound of a vintage typewriter. It became more persistent, usually at night, when the house was still. Emily's curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to investigate. One evening, armed with a flashlight, she followed the sound, which seemed to emanate from the small sunroom that overlooked the garden. She entered the room cautiously. The sound of typing was clear, but there was nothing there, no typewriter, no person. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Victor dismissed her concerns, suggesting it was probably the old pipes or the creak of the house settling. But Emily knew better. She had grown up around typewriters, and she was certain of what she had heard. Things took a more chilling turn when Emily began to find fragments of typed pages on her desk, short paragraphs written in neat, precise text. The content was strange. Cryptic lines about characters, locations, and events, as if part of a screenplay. The handwriting at the bottom of the pages, a bold "EB," sent chills down her spine. Emily became obsessed. She researched Baxter's life, discovering that the actress had taken up writing later in her career and had been working on an unfinished script at the time of her passing. Could it be that Baxter, in some inexplicable way, was trying to complete her work? The most unnerving incident occurred during a dinner party they hosted in December. A guest, an older man who had been a Hollywood producer in the 1960s, excused himself to make a phone call. Moments later, he returned pale and shaken. He claimed to have heard the unmistakable sound of a typewriter in the sunroom. When he stepped inside, he saw a faint shadow, a woman seated at a desk, her back to him. The shadow vanished when he called out. Though Victor remained skeptical, Emily embraced the mystery. She even bought an old typewriter, placing it in the sunroom in the hope of encouraging further contact. Some nights, she would leave a blank page in the machine. Occasionally, she would find it partially filled with typed words by morning lines that seemed to echo a story from another time. Whether it is a lingering creative spirit or simply a product of an overactive imagination, and Baxter's house continues to captivate and unsettle all who enter. For Emily, it's no longer a matter of fear but inspiration. If Anne wants to finish her script, she often says with a wry smile, "Who am I to stand in her way?" By January, Emily's life revolved around the strange happenings in the house. The typewriter seemed to have a mind of its own, responding to her questions, or so she thought. One evening, emboldened by a glass of wine and her growing curiosity, she sat at the typewriter and typed a single sentence. "What story are you trying to tell?" The house was silent for a long time after that. Too silent. Victor had gone out for the evening, and the air seemed heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Emily waited, her fingers hovering over the keys, but there was no response. Disappointed, she left the page in the machine and went to bed. When she returned the next morning, there was an answer. The page had been filled with a series of disjointed scenes. A woman running down a shadowy corridor, her footsteps echoing. The sound of laughter soft, almost mocking, coming from an unseen source. A final image of a hand reaching toward a closed door. The last line, typed in bold, read, "The truth is in the room you fear the most." Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. There was only one room in the house that gave her pause. The small basement storage space they had never bothered to explore. It was cluttered with boxes left behind by previous owners, and Victor had always joked that it probably held nothing more than old Christmas decorations and forgotten junk. But now Emily wasn't so sure. That night, she gathered the courage to venture downstairs. She brought a flashlight, its beam cutting through the stale darkness as she descended the narrow wooden stairs. The air grew colder with every step, and the faint scent of mildew hung in the air. The basement was silent at first, but as she moved deeper into the room, she heard the faint, unmistakable sound of a typewriter, coming from somewhere behind the stacked boxes. Her heart raced as she followed the sound, the clicking growing louder and faster, like a heartbeat on the verge of panic. When she reached the far corner of the basement, she found an old desk covered with a dusty sheet. Beneath it, the faint glow of a small desk lamp illuminated the keys of a vintage typewriter. It was identical to the one she had placed in the sunroom, identical in every way, except for one detail. This typewriter had a sheet of paper already in it, half filled with text. Emily's hands trembled as she read the words. "You're close now. Don't stop." She turned, her flashlight sweeping across the room, but she was alone. Or was she? The faintest sound, a breath, perhaps seemed to come from just behind her shoulder. She spun around, her flashlight flickering, and for a split second, she thought she saw a figure. A woman's silhouette, standing motionless in the shadows. Then it was gone. Emily ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind her. She didn't sleep that night, but as the hours dragged on, she couldn't help but wonder. What would happen if she went back? What was or whatever force haunted this house trying to show her? By morning, her resolve had returned. She wasn't sure if it was bravery or madness, but she knew one thing. She had to uncover the truth. Emily never told Victor about the basement. Instead, she kept her discoveries to herself, visiting the room in secret over the next few weeks. Each time, the typewriter seemed to have more to say, filling pages with fragments of a story that felt both eerily familiar and deeply unsettling. One night, as she pieced together the scattered scenes, she realized something chilling. The story wasn't fictional. It was a recounting of events that seemed to have taken place in their very house. And then, one night, the typewriter delivered its most cryptic message yet. "You'll find the ending where the story began." But where had the story begun? And more importantly, who or what was leading her to it? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Emily spent the following days combing through every corner of the house, searching for clues. The phrase, "where the story began," lingered in her mind, repeating like a riddle she couldn't solve. She inspected old photographs of the property, hoping to spot something she had overlooked, a detail in the architecture, a forgotten room. Anything but nothing stood out. The house seemed to mock her. Each night, the typewriter in the basement produced new fragments of the screenplay. The details became more vivid, the scenes more sinister. A recurring image emerged. A woman pacing in a dimly lit room, her silhouette framed by heavy curtains. Emily felt a strange pull toward this character, as though the woman were trying to reveal something crucial. Then came the night she found the photograph. It was tucked into the pages of an old book she had bought at an estate sale months earlier. The book, Hollywood, Behind the Curtains, had belonged to the previous owner of Baxter's house, as evidenced by the neatly inscribed name on the inside cover. The photograph was a grainy black and white print of the house itself, taken sometime in the 1950s. But it wasn't the house that caught Emily's attention, it was the figure standing in one of the windows. The woman in the photograph wore a long, flowing dress, and her face was obscured by the reflection of the glass. Emily's heart raced. She recognized the silhouette immediately. It was the same figure described in the screenplay fragments, the same figure she had glimpsed in the basement shadows. Turning the photograph over, she found a note written in elegant cursive. "The first draft is always the hardest." That night, as the clock struck midnight, the typewriter in the basement began to clatter violently. Emily didn't dare go downstairs, But she didn't need to. The sound was deafening, echoing through the entire house. When it finally stopped, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the faintest creak of floorboards directly above her. The attic. Emily had never been to the attic. Victor had mentioned it once, saying it was too cramped and dusty to bother exploring. But now she felt an overwhelming compulsion to go there. Armed with her flashlight and a ladder, she climbed up to the small square hatch in the ceiling of the hallway. The attic smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. Emily swept the flashlight beam across the space, revealing cobweb trunks, yellowed newspapers, and stacks of brittle boxes. Her eyes landed on an object tucked into the far corner, a large, ornate chest, its brass fittings dulled by time. As she approached, the air grew colder. She knelt and ran her fingers over the intricate carvings on the lid, delicate vines entwined with roses, like something out of a Victorian novel. The lock, rusted but fragile, snapped open with little effort. Inside the chest was a collection of Baxter's belongings. Old photographs, handwritten notes, and, at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal. Emily's hands trembled as she opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with elegant handwriting. Many entries were personal musings, but others were far stranger, vivid descriptions of dreams that bordered on nightmares. One entry, dated just weeks before Baxter's death, caught Emily's attention. "There's something unfinished in this house, something I can't escape. The dreams are stronger now, and the sound of the typewriter won't stop. I think it wants me to remember, but what? If I don't finish the story, will it finish me?" The words sent a chill through Emily. As she read further, a slip of paper fell from the journal. It was a page from a screenplay, written in Baxter's hand. The scene described a woman opening an attic chest to find something she had lost, something that tied her to the past and revealed a terrible truth. Before Emily could process the discovery, the attic door slammed shut. The flashlight flickered, plunging her into darkness. And then she heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from just behind her. She turned, but there was no one there, except for the faint glow of the typewriter in the far corner of the attic. It sat on a small wooden table that she hadn't noticed before. The machine's keys moved on their own, typing furiously. Emily approached, compelled to read the message appearing letter by letter on the page. "You found it. But do you really want to know?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. Whatever was happening in this house, she was now more entangled than ever. She reached for the page, her fingers brushing against the still warm paper, and the attic light went out. Emily's heart raced as the darkness of the attic pressed in on her. She fumbled for the flashlight, but her hands were shaking too violently to grip it. The oppressive silence was broken only by her shallow breaths and the distant sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. And then she heard it, a whisper, soft at first, like a breath on the wind, but then louder, more distinct, like someone speaking directly into her ear. "You're not supposed to be here." Emily froze. The voice wasn't Victor's, and it wasn't hers either. It was a woman's voice, familiar yet distant, like something that had been buried long ago. A chill crawled up her spine. She turned toward the typewriter, still faintly glowing in the corner, as if beckoning her to come closer. The footsteps, those slow, deliberate steps, had returned. She felt them more than heard them, each footfall echoing through the floorboards as if someone was pacing just out of sight. The weight of the air around her thickened, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Emily finally found the flashlight, its beam weak but steady. She shone it toward the typewriter, and the keys continued to tap, clack, clack, clack furiously, relentlessly, as though something or someone was desperate to finish a thought. The page that had been left there was nearly full now, and the words were no longer cryptic. They were more direct, more urgent. "She's coming. She wants what was taken." Her pulse quickened. She hadn't been sure who she was, but now she was certain. It wasn't just Baxter. It wasn't just the house. There was something deeper, something ancient, something tied to this property long before Baxter had ever stepped foot in it. Before Emily could process what she had read, the attic door slammed open behind her with a deafening crash. Her flashlight flickered wildly and then went out completely, plunging her into absolute darkness. The air grew heavier with each passing second, and she could feel something or someone drawing near. The footsteps grew louder, closer. It wasn't just a presence anymore. It was a form, something tangible, something real. And then, in the blackness, a shape appeared. It wasn't a figure that could be easily defined. It was more of a shadow, no, a presence, swirling in the air like smoke, coalescing into something more. Emily's breath hitched in her chest. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She reached for the door, but it was too late. The shadow surged forward, encircling her, a cold wind brushing against her skin. "Finish it," the voice whispered again. But this time it was louder, clearer, filled with a sense of authority, of desperation. "Finish what you started." And with that, the shape began to take form. Emily stumbled backward, her feet tangled in the floorboards. The room was suffocating with the energy of something ancient, something tied to the house, to the typewriter, to the woman whose presence lingered like a ghost. The air seemed to vibrate, like the electric hum of an old film projector. And suddenly, the sound of the typewriter wasn't just a faint echo, it was all-encompassing, overwhelming. Every key press was a thunderous beat that echoed in Emily's skull. And then, the shadow before her solidified into a woman's figure, tall, elegant, but twisted with an unnatural energy. Her face was obscured, but Emily could feel her eyes that watched her with a piercing intensity that made her skin crawl. The woman spoke again, her voice cold and commanding. "You know what you have to do." But Emily didn't. She didn't understand. She only knew that the house, the typewriter, the ghostly whispers, the footsteps had all led her here, to this moment, where the past and present collided in a horrific culmination. Whatever had been unfinished in the house for so long, whatever had been lost or stolen, was demanding to be returned. And Emily, for all her fear, knew that she was the key. She had been drawn in like a moth to a flame. She had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, but she hadn't yet discovered the whole truth. "The story is waiting," the voice whispered one final time, as the figure reached toward her, as though offering her the final piece to a puzzle that had been broken long before she arrived. With trembling hands, Emily reached out to take it. And then, without warning, the house around her shifted, the walls groaned. The air thickened, and the very ground beneath her feet seemed to tilt. The house, she realized, was alive. It was watching her. But as she reached for the typewriter one last time, Emily felt a cold hand on her shoulder. And she knew that the story, the real story, was far from over. Emily's heart pounded as the cold hand on her shoulder sent a shock of icy terror through her. She tried to turn, to break free from whatever grip the house had on her. But her body betrayed her, frozen, unable to move. The woman's figure loomed before her, now fully materialized in the shadowed attic, her presence commanding, almost suffocating. Emily could feel the weight of the woman's gaze, but the figure's face was still obscured, hidden beneath layers of darkness. The only thing that was clear was the feeling, the overwhelming sense that the house itself was alive, that it had been waiting for Emily to complete something, to give it what it needed. And the only way to do that was to finish the story. The typewriter on the far side of the attic began clattering again, this time louder, more forceful, as if it had a mind of its own. Emily's fingers twitched involuntarily, aching to reach out and touch the cold metal keys. She understood, at last, what the house wanted from her. It was an offering, a completion, a story that had been started long before her arrival, by a woman who had never let go, who had never finished what she started. But it wasn't just about the screenplay anymore. The house, this place, was a prison, one that had been bound to a story that she had written. And now, Emily was the unwilling writer, the one who had to bring it to its terrible, inevitable end. As she stepped toward the typewriter, the floor beneath her feet groaned, as though the house was resisting her movement, fighting against her. But Emily couldn't stop now, she had no choice. She sat at the machine, feeling a strange pull toward it, her fingers hovering over the keys. The woman's voice whispered again, this time in her ear, soft and haunting. "Finish it, or it finishes you." Her breath caught. Emily's fingers pressed down, one key at a time, the typewriter responding with a sharp, mechanical click, the sound reverberating through the room like the ticking of an ancient clock. The words came to her unbidden, as though the house itself was feeding them to her mind, directing her hand. She typed feverishly, without thinking, the words forming like a script that was not her own. She walks through the house, lost in the echoes of a life she cannot remember. The shadows follow her, whispering the truth she never wanted to know. The voice, that same voice, filled her ears, louder now, urging her to continue. Emily's hand moved faster, the words flowing uncontrollably, as if the typewriter had taken control. The woman's figure loomed closer, her presence almost suffocating as Emily continued typing. Her past was stolen from her, piece by piece, until only the darkness remained. The house, hungry for its story, had kept her prisoner. But now the end is near. The temperature in the attic dropped even further, and Emily could hear the walls creaking under the strain of something unseen. The whispering had become a cacophony, a maddening chorus of voices that seemed to press in from every direction. Emily's mind swirled. The words she typed were not just part of a screenplay, they were a prophecy, a final act, a conclusion that would bind her to this house forever. She typed faster, almost frantically, unable to stop now, unable to escape what she had begun. And so, she will finish what she started. She will give the house what it desires, the last page. And in return, she will remain here, trapped forever in its dark embrace. A sudden silence fell over the room. Emily paused. Her fingers hovered over the last key, trembling. She knew the moment she pressed it, it would all be over. There would be no going back. She would be part of the house's story, forever etched into its dark history. The figure of the woman stood silently beside her, her presence suffocating. Emily could feel her breath on her neck, cold and steady. And then, with a deep breath, Emily pressed the final key. The end. The typewriter stopped. For a moment, everything was still. The house, the whispers, the oppressive weight of the air, it all held its breath, as if waiting for something to change. Emily's eyes were locked on the page, her mind racing. The typewriter was silent. The room was unnervingly quiet. And then it began. The house trembled beneath her feet, the walls groaning in protest. The lights flickered, casting erratic shadows on the floor. From somewhere deep within the house, a low, mournful sound began to rise, the sound of a door opening, of footsteps, of something coming closer. Emily stood, frozen in terror, as the walls seemed to pulse with an energy that was alien, ancient. She felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes watching her. She knew in that moment that the story had been completed. But at what cost? The woman's figure, still standing at her side, began to fade. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shadow melted away, leaving behind only the lingering scent of old paper and dust. The air lightened, but Emily didn't feel any sense of relief. The house wasn't done yet. It had been waiting for the final page. Yes, but it wasn't finished with her. As Emily turned to leave, she heard the unmistakable sound of a typewriter, faint but unmistakable, echoing from the darkness of the hallway. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.